Guys, welcome to another episode of our Java tutorial simplified. Today I'm going to be covering reading and writing to files. We'll be talking about the Java input output package that comes in the Java library. I am Lamoha Igoroje, by the way, and I'm encouraging you to watch the other videos before this video if you haven't already watched them and you're not too familiar. If you like and you think you get things easy, or you can easily understand what is being said, then you can start from this video if you desire. But today we'll just be talking about how to read from files, write to the files, get into things. So in our main class objects that we created in other tutorial videos in the introductory, we'll be using that main class object today as well. The first thing we need to do is that we want to be, because we're going to be making use of the input output package, we're going to be using the input output package in Java that comes with Java. That's the JRE system library. So if you're using an IDE of your choice, you most likely just for you to have installed the IDE, you must have installed Java on your machine. So you'll be able to access or have access into the Java package input output. It helps us to be able to, it contains classes that we can use for creating files, reading from files, writing to files, right? So the first thing you want to do in your program class object or in your program coming freely in your IDE or with Java, as the case, I don't know how easy it is for you to understand what I'm saying, but if you need to understand what I'm saying, follow my or go to my other tutorial videos and you would see what I'm talking about in the first introduction. But for this purpose of this tutorial, we're going to have to import what you call the Java IO package, the input output package. Most time the package, if you just put a dot, it will show you all the available class objects you can make use of. You have a file class object that you can import, and you can import each class object that you're working with. You don't have to import all. But in order to be safe, because most times you may need to reference quickly a particular IO class object, and you, instead of going back to say, oh, import this, import each one, I'm just going to use the star, that's this asterisk sign. Once you have an asterisk sign for an import, it means you're importing everything or every class object in that package. So this is the package java.io, and I'm importing dot star would import everything. So that is the first thing you also want to do in your code, to import that. Now once you import that class object, once you import that package, right, you're going to have access to all the different class objects in the package, like I've said. So the first one we were going to be looking at doing, because we want to do file writer and file reader, we want to look at the file writer and file reader class objects, which allow us to write from files, read to files, right? So what we need to do is also to first create a file object, because once you have a file object, you can reference your file object from your file writer and file reader, right? So how in Java, you may ask, how do you reference a class object that you need to use certain methods from? Why are you doing this? Let's ask ourselves, why do we want to do this? Sometimes you may need to pause. The reason why you have to create an instance of a particular class object in a package you're using is because what would point, ask yourself this question, what will be pointing if I need to use, they already, instead of me writing from scratch some methods or functions, why not just use what is already there? There's some written for you already that you can just use by referencing a particular object. It's like saying, for example, I want to read from a file, right? Picture this. You want to read from a file, and um you want to read from the file. Yes, first of all, it's established that you want to read from the file, and this is what we want to do. There is a Imagine a container or a box, an object, right? And that object already has a method that can help us to easily tell the machine or tell the system when you want to read from a file, providing the file name, for example. But you can call on that method and say, help me do this, read from a file. So basically, what referencing all other class objects does for you is to be able to access easily certain methods to do things to perform tasks that you want the machine to perform for you, right? So, because they already exist, or that particular object is known for doing that thing, right? So now, in order to create an instance or make reference to any class object where you will be drawing methods from or functions from to use in your program, you need to first give it the name. What is the first thing you need to do is make sure you know what class object you are referencing. A good way to know this is always refer to your Java documents. Refer to the package. Make sure, so if you check in the description box below in this tutorial, you would find out that I've left the link to the Java document, which would help you to access all these individual Java packages. We have the Java input output package here. That's the one here. And just make it your best friend. Make whatever Java document you have your best friend. It tells you everything. It tells you what methods do, what classes are responsible for. So we're going to be looking at, if you look here, you see the different classes. So let's look at this file class object that we want to be using to help us to create a new file object. So what does it tell you? It will give you an instruction, or it will tell you, if you read through the description, you'll be able to tell what that class does. And then if you scroll further down, you'll be able to see different methods that that class has. So for example, the file class object that we're going to be using has a method here called create new file. What does the create new file do for us rather? It automatically creates a new empty file named by this abstract path name, if and only if a file with that name does not yet exist. So it helps us to create a file if the file does not exist already, right? So make the Java document your friend, and you can access it in the description box below, right? The link rather to the Java document. So the first thing we want to do is call on that object, class object. What is the name? It's called the file class object. Now we need to give it an identifier. You can call it whatever identifier you desire to call it, right? I would call this file 1, for example. And once you create that file object, just as you have variables in the last tutorial I talked about, or rather the second tutorial video on my YouTube channel, I talked about variables, the types. I talked about identifiers for variables. Just as you have variable identifiers, if you do not understand what I am saying, refer back to that video and watch it. Now, variable types, just as you have different types, so you've given this type, now it's a file type, right? For that object that we're using, we've given it an identifier to identify that object we're creating as file 1, and we say new, create a new instance for me of that file, and we specify the path, the location to which that file is going to be stored. So this is the name, actual name of the file that we're creating. It's called the greetings.txt. Notice that I even put the extension of the file, so that, because when you put an extension of a file you're creating, it tells you automatically, or it creates a text file for you right? So you put that as a string literal into this object. So it's the full path to that file. If you do not put anything, it will most likely create a blank file. You can practice and see what would happen. But it's and if, for example, you just put only greetings.txt, the name of the file you want, it's going to create it in your computer's path, default path, right? So, but because I want it to be created in our Java Love Codings project, right? I've given it the path to the Java Love Codings project before actually giving my name of my file, right? Does that make sense? I'm going to repeat it one more time. You could decide to put just the name of the file, greetings.txt, telling it is a text file. Create me a text file called greetings.txt. If I put that, it will create it in my computer's path, default path, right? But because I want it to be created in my Java Love Codings project, I have to provide the path to that project before actually giving it the name. So I've created this instance of the file object. The next thing is you want to just use the identifier dot, and it will give you access to all the methods. So we want to create the actual, now go ahead to use call upon the create new file method, right, in that object. So this is the file one object. I do dot. You will see a lot of methods. Methods are usually denoted with a bracket beside them, and you could see sometimes it may contain another we'll talk more about that. Don't complicate things for now, but just know that methods can be identified easily because of the brackets they have. If you see anything in between, it just tells you that you need to pass another object into that method, right? For example, compared to, and if you're using an ID, the good thing about using IDs is if you look on the side, it tells you already what you need to tells you a brief about what that method can do for you. So we're looking for the create new file. Good thing about ID is that ID is once you put the dot, you can have a list of all the methods and easily go through and be able to see what each one does, right? So create new file method. What does it do for us? We've read that already previously from the Java doc. We'll read it again here. Automatically creates a new file, empty file named by this abstract partner if and only if that file name does not exist, right? So we're going to be using that method and we call it create new file. So once we've done that, we just run this code and we should have our file created once it finishes running. So it's doing, remember Java would compile once you hit run and it will do that for you. So once that um button, like a play and stop button, the stop one turns gray, you know your program has finished running. So we're just going to refresh this to make sure that yep. So as you can see here, we've created that file. Because we gave it the path to create it in this project, we can view the file here. It's called the greetings.txt file. We're just going to open that right now to see. I want us to be seeing everything as we go on, you know. This is the file. It's an empty file, as we can see. I would also open the file in our IDE. Open with the text editor. And as we can see, it's an empty file. Nothing has been put into it yet. So what do you want to do after you've created your file, right? The next thing I'm going to be showing us is how to write to the file. So I've got this file I've created called greetings.txt. Now I need to write to the file. I'm going to make use of the file writer class object, right? So I have a file writer class object. You can check in the Java doc again. What it helps you do is just to be able to perform different to be able to write to a file. Basically, that's it. It's as simple as the name and explanatory as the name tells you. File writer. It has method in it to help you write to a file, whatever you want to write. So the same way we created our file type class object, we're going to create a file writer type class object by specifying the type. It's a file writer class object. Give it an identifier, file write, and we say new. So basically, when you have something on the right side of an equal to like that in Java, it means you're putting this thing, what is on the right hand side, on this side, into this object, or you're into a container you have that's been identified with that name, right? So now I'm going to give it the file one. So I've created an instance of the file writer class object, and I've passed in my file. So I want to write, I've passed in the name of the file. So what I'm doing here is simply passing in the name of the file that I want to write into, right? Let's go back to the Java doc because I'm sure some people may be a bit confused. So we've got file writer. So this is the file writer class object in our Java doc. And how you can reference it. So when you see constructors just show you how you can reference, or the ways you can reference such class objects. So we're using the simplest form. It constructs a file writer object given a file object. That's as simple as that, right? There are other methods or another way you can do it. So if, say, you didn't create a file object, you could actually just construct a file writer object and give it a file name directly. If you know the name of the file, you can actually just type it in as a string, right? So we're going to use that as another, I'll show you doing that. So for example, instead of me passing the file object that I created earlier, say because I know the name of the file, I'll just give it this name. But at the same time, I also have to specify the full path. So I'll give it exactly what I have here, actually. And, oh yeah, it's complaining because of the, you have to make it a string literal. So basically, you give it exactly what you have there if you know the name of the file. But why would I have to do that when I can simply just reference that file object? Do you get what I mean? It's not, you do not have to, if you know the name of the file, and the path to the file, you can specify that you want to write to. But simply because I just created the object and I know the object exists, I'll just give it the identifier for that object, right? After doing that, the next thing is you want to use the same way the identifier dot a method called write. So you see, let's just go back for the case of, so it's called the file write dot. What does the method write do for us? Let's see. So you've got different writes. So we're using the one because we're passing a string in. So what does it do? It writes a certain string, or writes the string that you specify in the method into that file, right? If you want to write characters, you can use an array of characters. For example, just random characters. You can use this write method. So there are different write methods examples, or different methods of, or different instances of the write method. So we'll just use the string because we're writing a string, and because I already have this, I'm just going to, so that's it. I want to write Lamoha is a beautiful girl, right, into our file. So I reference, that's the identify, what's my file writer object. So I'm using the file writer object to call a method called write that will help me with doing that. And that's a simple, once it's written to the file, like it will open it, it will write to the file, it does everything without me manually telling the computer, just calling that method has told the computer what to do. And I close the object because what I'm saying, what close the function from that class object, right? The right function from the class object, or the right method, let's call it a method, from the class object, file writer class object, will help to write something to the file. The close, as the name suggests, would help to close the file once the writing has been done. Once you finish writing, you close the file. It will all be done without you even noticing. So I'm going to run this, and once we run this and it's done running, then you can go and check out your greetings.txt file and you'll see what you've written there. Lamoha is a beautiful girl. Simple, you've written to a file. Now the next thing we want to do is to read from a file. So in Java, it's all the same kind of things. So we want to read from that file we've just written into. We want to read it and print out what we read from it onto our systems console, or our IDE console, right? So what are we going to use? We're going to use a class object called file reader that helps us with reading from files. And we'll give it the same way we gave an identifier to the writer class object and to the file class object. We're going to use fread to identify our file reader object, and we say new file reader passing the file. Same, that's how you basically reference class objects. You just most times just have to new create the instance of that class object. Yeah, so file reader will read from this file. We're giving it the file we want to read from. Now system the out, like I said in our other videos, helps us to print system.out.println, println, which is print line, helps us to print to a new line whatever you give or specify in between it. Yeah, and you can specify in your system.out.print either a string literal, an integer. You can specify so many things to print out. You can specify an object to print out. So basically here I'm specifying that I want to print out, so from my reader object, right? I have a reader object here, and I'm using a dot readline method from the reader object. I'm going to type this so we can see. I'm going to do it again so you can have an idea. So dot read line. What does read line do? Read line reads a line of text. A line is considered to be terminated by any of a line feed, such as a new line, a carried return, or a carried return to, right? So basically it's going to read every line from that text, and it will terminate it where it sees a new line, simply. So we're going to use that read line method. So basically, before, while we're using the buffered reader, what does the buffered reader class object? When you see new, just know that whatever in Java, it's quite easy to remember this. When you see anything new and you see something, just know that that thing is a class object that contains some method that you need, right? So buffered reader helps us to buffer characters. So if we had just put this fread file reader, you've given it the file to read from, and you just put it in between the system.read line. I'm going to even do that for us so we can understand better. So say I was to print system.out. It's good practice to see this thing so you understand better. So print line, and I give it fread. You see what will happen. And I'm going to comment this out. So if I run this, you'll see what will be printed to our systems console, and I would explain further from there. So as you can see, this is very ununderstandable to humans. Like, it's just the character, the machine understands or has read from that file. So the file reader class object has helped us. We specified what file we're reading from, and it's created an instance of it, right, and told it where we're reading from. But you printing that object onto the console does not no good for you, because it just prints this something you cannot understand. So what a buffered reader, that leads us to what a buffered reader would do for you. So a buffered reader, if you check in your Java document, like I've shown you as an example, buffered reader helps us to buffer characters from whatever file you specify, and it will buffer the characters and make it readable. It has a method that can read and actually, or read from, has read line method, has other read methods that will make it understandable to read. So you have to read when you want to understand, or like whether be it a string or a character that is coming out funny, a buffered reader is a good way to help you to buffer characters and present it in a more efficient way. So we'll create an object of that buffered reader, and we pass it the um, file reader object, and then we call the method readLine to help us in reading line from that file in a way that we understand. And then once it's done reading the line, it should close it, right? So the file reader, file writer, they all have close methods. And the close method, it means when you open the file to write to the file, close it when you're done. When you open the file to read from the file, close it while you're done, because you don't want your machine to have so many things still open or pending. So that is it. We're going to run this now, and then we'll see what will be printed out. So voila, it prints Lamoha is a beautiful girl, and that's exactly the same thing it's read from the file. You can try writing so many other things to the file and reading it, and you'll see it will be the same. Another similar thing to the file reader and writer is the string reader. And what does a string reader do? A string reader, if you have a string variable that contains text, say you've designed your application to collect some text from the user, right? It comes in as a string text, right? And it will just treat that as an input source. So a string reader basically will just take that text and treat it as an input, and we can read the text one word at a time. We can work on the text the way we like. We can split the text. We can input the text, maybe the third word in that text into something. You can manipulate it the way you desire. Yeah. So this is wrong. So what are we going to be doing now? So like I've said, always learn to refer to your Java doc, and you'll see what the string reader class object does for you. So basically, what do you have to do? We have a string. I've given a string. For example, I have a string here called lamb eagle, right? And I want to be able to say from that string, I want to know that surname or last name is eagle, and I want it to only reference just that part of the string, right? And not the full string. So what do? I create an object of, or a class, and I make a reference to the string reader class object by creating an instance of it, and I give it an identifier called last name, and I tell it that it should take this full name, the full string, and it should create a substring. So anytime you see dots, it means I'm using a method. So what does the substring method do for me? The substring method returns a string that is the substring of this string. The substring begins with the character at the specified index and extends to the end of this string. So it gives you examples here. You can see it says, for example, on happy dot substring 2 returns happy. So it removes it starts counting. So this is what 0. Most times characters have counted from 0 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 0, 1, 2. Saying 2 means start from 2 and give me all the other characters, right? So you can, so from here we have 0, L is 0, A is 1, 2, 3. You count spaces as well. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 is going to be I. So I'm saying this, the last name would be what you read from that string, full name string. Create a substring of it and give me that. What you could also do, diving in deeper, is to split this. So there's a method where you can split from the string reader. A string reader contains split method where you can split and put into different, maybe an array, and then you can say, okay, when you split using the space, the first thing is this. Just check it out. I'm just not going to confuse you so much because I know a lot of us are beginners, but this is a method. So this is a way of calling the substring method. Then we print, and the same thing is, if we just print this out directly, because string reader last name, we want to print last name, it's not going to print out something that we can understand when it's being read. It's just going to, it's like it's like just characters, the system characters, right, that it will print out. So what we want to do is to use a buffer reader to actually buffer the characters so that it will become more efficient to read. So the same thing we did for the buffered reader to read the line in the file is the same thing we do when we want to read the line of the last name. So we're going to print this out to our systems console, and like we see, prints out the name Eagle. That's all. Quite easy, right, to remember. It's not difficult, so you can just practice on your own and manipulate it using your Java document. Make reference to your Java document. For the file reader, you can see a lot of the functions. The file writer, you can see all the methods as well. And for the file, you can see all the things that it can perform for you, what it can do. Even if you want to delete a file, you can practice deleting the file and creating a new one. All sorts. You can also see the buffered reader class object that we made use of. So we basically have been using a lot of we use the file class object, buffered reader object, we use the file reader and the file writer objects in this tutorial, which contains a lot of methods that already exist for you to do your program. Thank you so much for listening, and next time we'll be talking more about arrays and lists in Java. Thank you.